Thank you very much for this opportunity and for your understanding. A very good afternoon to you all. Your Excellency, DCP, and if I may request that I just say protocol observed to keep the time for this program for those on the stage. I recognize you all that are in this room. I want to, in particular, recognize our young minister who just left the floor. I think certainly Our Excellency, the DCP, Monique Nsanza-Bagano, will appreciate the future leadership words that have been said and will help us in continuing to champion the words of young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be very brief with our intervention. I stand here today representing Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, who's our climate champion for COP27. We have had the utmost pleasure to partner with UNECA in the last year to deliver on the Africa Regional Climate Forum and several other initiatives. As I introduced during our panel, looking at financing of projects, of climate finance projects, we have continued to think about the various ways that we can crowd in both public and private sector financing into the continent with a particular focus on adaptation projects, since already mitigation projects are covered. To that end, I wish to recognize and to thank the African Union, to thank UNECA, to thank the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, the African Development Bank, ClamDev Africa, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, and the Stockholm Environment Institute for this invitation and the continued partnership in delivering to us driving green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. I want to particularly recognize the climate finance, the climate division in UNECA that we have been partnering with to deliver on the Africa Climate Forum. We have in the last year delivered on something called the Compendium of Climate-Related Initiatives, Opportunities for Climate Finance and Investments in the SDGs. At COP27, following our first Africa Regional Forum, we launched the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, we launched the Africa Climate Risk Facility, and we launched the From Assets to Flows report that looked at exactly what is happening. And the real outcome and the synthesis of the reports here is that climate finance is inefficient, it's insufficient, and it's unfair. And with already soaring debt levels and borrowing costs, and climate action must be funded through more equity investments and concessional financing. We have made it very clear in our efforts to create projects, a pipeline of projects in the continent, to ensure that the projects and the way, the means that they are being financed are not overburdening African countries. That means that the priorities of African continent, as the smallest contributor to the climate crisis and one of the most vulnerable to climate shocks, low development and high poverty, must be at the center of all climate talks internationally, in particular for climate finance. So the sooner the global community acts on Africa's needs for a just, equitable, fair, and financed transition, the greater our chances for driving a global race to a healthier, resilient, net zero emissions economy. So while we're here and the international community has descended upon Nairobi for this Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week, we do recognize that conversations should not only be amongst Africans, but certainly what we need to hear is stronger commitments to once unlocking bulk financing to climate action projects in the continent. Africa collectively needs $2.8 trillion of investments within this decade in order to achieve its national commitments to the Paris Agreement, and this is according to the Climate Policy Initiative. But it is very glaring that while we talk about access to climate finance, We also recognize that at the moment, African countries have to finance climate action projects through their national budgets. And the problem with this particular statement is, through national budgets, there's also financing of servicing of national debts. And as it stands at the moment, over 67 African countries finance their servicing of their national debt more than they do for education and healthcare. The figure is such that we have 67 countries financing over 27% of their national budgets to debt servicing. This is a problem. It's an injustice and an inefficient way of operating the global financial architecture. And so we have put together a set of recommendations for how we must deal with issues and ratify the equity and sustainability of the climate finance environment. So first is to extend below market rate or concessional capital to emerging markets and to developing markets. Secondly is to implement credit enhancement and credit guarantee schemes to incentivize the private sector to play in the concessional lending model. This will mitigate project financing risks and bolster investor confidence, thereby drawing much-needed private capital into the continent. Third, suspend and reduce debt for low and middle-income countries. Around 2/3, as I have mentioned, of low-income countries are estimated to be in high debt distress or at risk of it. Fourth, establish a fund that helps private sector mitigate foreign exchange risk by providing cost-effective currency, country hedges for climate action investments in the continent. This multi-partner trust fund would reduce the perceived risk of investing in emerging markets, in particular in Africa. And lastly, create a turbocharger facility for projects and entrepreneurs already running projects on the continent, especially those that can regenerate nature and help communities adapt to climate change impacts such as droughts, floods, extreme heat. This does not need to be a brand new fund. However, we must ensure that we are making use of the infrastructure that we have, and we could seriously tap into the existing funders and investment instruments that are already operating in the continent. Progress on these 5 reforms is already afoot. We were just in Paris in June, and we saw an exemplary deal for $2.7 billion of clean energy investments from developed countries to Senegal, and the restructure of $6.3 billion debt for Zambia. The Africa Risk Capacity as well offers solutions such as parametric insurance to cover disaster-related risks. These are some of the progress we're seeing. And we believe that with such innovative finance measures, we will see Africa recover from disaster, build resilience for future shocks, and take part in leading a green development transition. It is therefore time that we recognize that the sustainable development rewards that can come from climate action and finance in Africa will not only enable the development of Africa, but will certainly allow all of us to reach our long-term climate goals. Africa must continue to be at the center of these conversations, and I look forward to you joining all of us in various Africa Climate Action Summits on climate finance, but in particular, we will also have a session at the SDG Summit and the Climate Action Summit that specifically focuses on unlocking finance for this compendium of projects that we have created. I once again would like to thank you for making time for me to make this quick intervention, and we certainly will keep you all in the loop on the reports that we're working on, and hope that we continue to partner towards the delivery of climate action projects in the continent. Thank you very much.